Hello everyone, welcome to Insights Alley. In this series about startup basics, we will try to understand and learn from insights shared by various phenomenal people around startups, product, growth, sales, strategy, and everything in between. My name is Arun Verma, and let's get started. In today's episode, we will talk to Gaurav Agarwal, who is the VP of Growth in a consumer hardware startup in SF called Molekule. We'll talk about his growth process and why and how we should be thinking about growing leads or sales from existing and new channels, like as if we are running a hedge fund. So here is the episode. Hey Gaurav, welcome to Insights Alley, and thanks a lot for taking out some time for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Arun, for having me.
So Gaurav, would you like to start by telling us your story so far, like in brief, from IB background to some of your own startups, I think, and then Molecule now leading growth here?
Absolutely. So, I graduated from college. I did a degree in industrial engineering.
Okay.
Straight out of industrial engineering, out of college, I went and worked for Barclays Capital in credit trading. That's where I learned how to handle risk, manage portfolio, and have a very quantitative bent of mind when you have business decisions. While I was at Barclays Capital, I was trying out my own company. It was a company called Vivify It, where we were trying to make SaaS that museums could use to tell their story better.
Oh,
It didn't work out, but it was a ton of learning for us, especially understanding how a product-based business is different from a service-based business.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there are hybrid businesses where product needs a ton of hand-holding. And if your margins are not extremely lucrative, there's no point going into that business. But yeah, I had a great career at Barclays, loved spending time, worked with them in Singapore, Tokyo, and London. But a piece of fun, that adventure that was missing from my life was being a part of the startup ecosystem, building up products and actually deliver value. So I moved to Bay Area to work with this company from MIT Media Lab called LensBricks, and they were deploying artificial intelligence at the camera level itself.
Okay.
So imagine a camera that can record what's happening in the scene, but can also identify what's happening and analyze the information and pass on that metadata as it's recording the image. So that was a very interesting journey. We learned what not to do when you're pre-product market fit. The company eventually went, and that's when I got an opportunity to move to Molekule. Molekule is a consumer hardware company where we are bringing disruptive science, especially in the field of air purification, to consumers. And I lead end-to-end growth and marketing for them. So it's been an interesting journey so far. We have raised I was a part of the founding team member. So from absolutely nothing to having a healthy 7-figure monthly revenue run rate.
Wow.
We've come quite far in the last 2.5 years.
Oh, nice. That's nice. So let's dive into today's topic. So, could you let us know, how do you think about growth systems and leads specifically?
So, first I'll attack the growth system question that you asked.
Sure.
I see growth as an outcome of different processes that have been coordinated to work well with each other, which is indirectly the definition of a system. I don't see growth as something that you do once and you get the outcome once. That's more of a growth hack.
Right.
But the problem with growth hack is you can't build sustainable companies out of growth hack. You can have spikes in your growth trajectory because of growth hacks. But what you really need to understand as a growth leader is your responsibility is not just to come up with hacks or not to fall into trying to come up with the next hack. Your work is to figure out how to deliver systemic growth. And systemic growth is sustainable and it's robust.
Right.
That these are the two, and scalable. These three things are very, very important. So I see growth as a combination of processes working together, which means a system that works even when you sleep. That's how you should see about it. So you have invested a lot of time in making that thing work, and now it's constantly working. You still have to spend time in calibrating it and adjusting it and maintaining it. But for a lot of it keeps delivering you success.
Also, particularly your case of Molekule, is it like your growth system from acquisition to the purchase, or like you provide lead to the sales team? Because I have background in like B2B SaaS, so my work is centered around that. How do you work around that?
Great question. So in B2C marketing, we generally don't have that sales team approach.
Okay.
We try and create multiple stories and multiple touch points with the consumer. So in B2B, what you do is your ticket value is high.
Right.
So you introduce a personalized salesperson to tell the story in a very personalized way. That's because your volume may be low, but your ticket size is high.
Right.
In most consumer marketing, if you look at any consumer marketing, right, you are really trying to talk to millions and millions of people at once.
Right.
So your ticket price may be slightly lower, but your volume is high. And then what you need to do is, I think that's a subtle difference between marketing automation and say sales automation is.
Right.
What's important for us is to constantly engage millions and millions of people, and then thousands and thousands of people across the funnel in an automated way, and help them basically travel the funnel in an automated way. Right. So we do not really have a sales team.
Okay. Understood. You right now just mentioned like your growth system needs to be repeatable, scalable, robust, and I also remember one point that was expansive. So like, could you you have advocated about this? Could you explain more on this? Like each of these 4 points, what do you mean by that?
So I mean, what I mean by let's look at each of these points, right?
Right.
It has to be repeatable in the sense it shouldn't be a hack. It shouldn't be something that you've done once and now you can't do it again.
Right.
Oftentimes people exploit a certain weakness in an ad platform. Now it's good that you found a weakness and you can exploit it. But one thing to keep in mind is you can't perennially be exploiting it. So if 80% of your revenue is coming because Facebook favors a certain kind of a creative more than the other kind of a creative,
right,
and it's totally because of a systemic glitch, then one thing you need to keep in mind is at some point Facebook will fix that glitch.
Right.
And then what do you do? Like the whole black hat SEO world was built upon, well, actually that's more robust. So I'll get to robust in a while.
Sure.
But what I mean by repeatable is you cannot be relying upon one-time hack.
Right.
That you can't repeat again, because then what you have done is you have shot yourself in the foot. You have delivered good results today, but you don't know how to deliver good results tomorrow.
Okay.
And that's going to be bad for you. So that's the repeatable piece.
Sure.
The scalable piece is you need to know, you don't want to spend time on a channel or on some sort of a system that cannot scale. For example, say I do consumer marketing, right? So for me, it's important that I can sell thousands and thousands of units. And then that means that if I have two channels ahead of me, one channel potentially is perhaps more difficult to work with, but can deliver tens and thousands of units sold. Right. The other channel is perhaps the same level of difficulty to work with, or slightly less difficult to work with, but can only deliver a few hundred units. It's imperative that you attack the 1,000-unit channel first and then go to the 100-unit channel.
Okay. So
that's the scalable piece. There's a lot of fancy things that come in your way once you launch your own company. Right. And you'll be like, this is so cool and I should do it. But you should also evaluate, is this scalable? If that's not scalable, there's no point doing it. That brings us to the third point, which is robust. Robust, what I mean by robust is you should be able to understand if whatever system you've put in place is going to last. Because if it's not going to last and you'll constantly have to keep upgrading what you're working on, then there's a problem. For example, the whole black hat SEO world was built on something that was Google's weakness, but it wasn't robust. Right. So the moment Google changed its algorithm, a bunch of companies just died. Right. Because it's not going to fly.
Right. Okay.
So that's about being robust. Are you too reliant on another platform? For example, Zynga. Zynga launched a ton of its games on Facebook, Farmville and blah, blah, blah. And then all it took Facebook was to change its algorithm or deprioritize Zynga. Right. And now all of Zynga's growth was dead.
Right.
And by expansive, what I mean is what you learn in that channel should help you deliver success in some other channel. So what I mean by that is if you're spending too much time learning about your customers, but that is relevant only in that one channel, then then that's not good for you. For example, in consumer marketing,
Right.
what you learn from search engine marketing should help you do your work on Facebook advertising better. Or what
Right.
you learn from Facebook advertising should allow you to handle retail stores better because you know what kind of audiences are people responding to in Facebook.
Right.
You know
That's an
what I'm
interesting
saying?
point.
But oftentimes what you would not, you may have isolated channels that have nothing to do with each other. And then the problem of going after those channels first is even if you have success in those channels, you can't take that success and replicate it elsewhere.
Okay. So from your point, like for your lead generation, you have to have multiple channels. So for me, like it was kind of very intuitive and obvious line of thought. Maybe I'm coming from a B2B background. But it is indeed not the case as you've mentioned with the example of Zynga. You also have once mentioned example of VD or Teach Street. Could you tell more on that? What was that?
Teach Street was reliant upon Google's algorithm. So they were doing a lot of
Oh,
SEO,
okay.
and then Google changed its Panda algorithms, and then Teach Street died
Oh,
because they
okay.
lost 80% of their traffic. And I think that's what I meant by lead generation. So you need to ensure that you have different channels that can help you understand where your leads are coming from,
Right.
and then each of these channels are mutually they're not impacted. For example, if your channel is your website, right, and Google is and you're too reliant upon Google, and if Google changes something, then now you are dead.
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Because Google has changed it. So
Right.
you need to ensure that you have a few distinct channels from where you have.
Right. And Google like changed their algorithm quite many times, especially related to SEO. So that
Yeah,
we
the
see.
way I look at this right now, so I delivered this talk that you're talking about
Right.
a year ago, right? And the way I
Yes.
look at it now is in a slightly different light. And the way I look at it now is at
Okay.
any point of time, you're sitting on a portfolio of growth opportunities.
Hmm.
Now, it's similar to a portfolio of a fund manager.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is each of these assets in your portfolio, or each of these tactic or channel in your portfolio, will have a different return window, and there's a different level of risk associated with it.
Okay.
There's going to be risk always, right? Because if there's no risk, there's no reward. Each channel is going to have some amount of risk. Now, and each channel is going to have some amount of scalability, and each channel is going to have some amount of mean time to conversion. What I mean by that is not every channel is going to give you results as soon as you start working on it.
Okay.
But what you need to ensure is you have a portfolio that is forward looking, and based on like classic portfolio theory, some things would perform, some things would not. You should be able to carry a portfolio with you that delivers growth in short term, mid term, and long term.
Okay. So like we have established that we obviously need to have multiple channels for your lead gen, right? But as you mentioned, how do we associate risk to these channels, like channels and risk? How do we look around that?
That's a very good question because there's no exact science on how you would do it. Risk is really the variability of reward, correct? That's how you would
Right.
see it.
Right.
So, if you ask any statistician, what he will tell you is risk is really about how much is the reward, and then what's the expected value of the reward, and then what's the spread around it.
Right.
So for example, is your reward going to be between 8% to 12%, or is your reward going to be between 1% to 20%? Right? So the second one is a scenario where there's more high risk and more reward. So that's how I would see risk really. You have to look at each of these channels and then understand what is the expected value you can get out of it, and then what is the variance or what is the spread of that expected value.
Okay.
So if you drew a normal distribution curve or a bell curve,
Sure.
then you could say that let's assume two channels, and let's assume channel 1 and channel 2, both of them have the almost same expected reward.
Right.
For some hypothetical metric, let's assume their rewards are 100 each.
Okay.
But on channel 1, your bell or your spread is more. So you see that your 3 sigma means are at 30-30. So that means that your reward can vary from 30 to 170.
Okay.
Okay. The mean is at 100. For channel 2, that let's say that the delta that you have is 50. So then your reward can vary from 50 to 150. So now you have, if you draw two normal distribution curves, in one curve you have the bell is thicker than the other curve. So based on that, you should be able to understand like, okay, channel 1 is more riskier than channel 2. Channel 1 may have more high reward because channel 1 can go up to 170 while channel 2 can go up to only 150. But channel 1 is more riskier than channel 2 because channel 1 can also go as low as 30, whereas channel 2 will go as low as 50.
Okay. Let's take an real example. So like suppose we have to hit a number of leads for a month or a quarter, right? Let's say it's 500, and for each channel, so whether it's like online ads, Facebook ads, Google AdWords, or email content, for each of these channels, we have historical data of leads also, like how much leads each channel brought in, right? So now we want to have that, we want to hit that target. So and we also want to try new channels. So like how do we backtrack from that target number that we want to hit and then come around this thing?
That's a very good question, and there's no really right or wrong answer. But I'll tell you how I approach it at Molekule, okay?
Yeah, sure.
So you said 500 leads, right? And you already have some data.
Yeah.
So exactly. I'm also assuming that you have slightly more resources to try a few experimental things out as well.
Exactly. So let's assume that we want to try out new channels as well, and we have some historical data around different type of channels, be it Facebook ads, then Google AdWords, search display network, and content, SEO, maybe conferences, these kind of channels, right?
Awesome. So then one thing you can do is look at all the data that you already have from each of these channels and calculate the cost per lead.
Okay.
And how many leads are you getting from each of these channels on a monthly basis? Okay. So the first thing I would do is I would list out everything that I have, and I would look at what is the cost per lead from each of these channels, and then what is the, and I'm also assuming same lead quality. Okay.
Right.
Assuming same lead quality, you list out what are the number of leads you have from each of these channels and what is the cost per lead. Now what you need to do is, you said your target is 500, right?
Right.
Do the math. If you are already getting to 500, then keep running these channels, because you know confidently that there's a good chance you'll hit 500 with these channels already.
Right.
If you are getting more than 500, if you do the math and it comes out to be more than 500, I would suggest cut out one or two channels that are expensive than other channels. So then you reach the number of 500, but you also cut out a few channels where the cost per lead was expensive.
Right. But generally, like the target is set very high. So let's say last number was 350, and now we want to hit 500.
Okay.
So
that's a very good.
That's the case.
That's
right?
a good question. That's a very good question. So the first thing you need to do is, then let's assume between all the channel mix you already have 350 leads, correct?
Right.
So you know that based on assuming your growth system is repeatable, you know that there's a good chance that you'll be able to get to 350 leads again.
Right.
So that's your worst case scenario.
Right.
Okay. That's a good outcome. Now what I would do is, you need to still figure out how do you get to an extra 150 leads now.
Exactly.
So I would revisit each of those channels that you have in your list and see, is there an opportunity to scale? Now, not all of them are going to scale. So what I would do is, generally the way to achieve this is, if you have budget for 500 leads, you have already allocated budget for 350 leads. You already know where that's going.
Right.
Next thing I'm going to do is, I am going to, for each of these channels, first I'm going to look at them internally and see, can any one of them not scale? If any one of them cannot scale, for example, conferences, then you can't just scale conferences if there are no conferences happening. So I would cut out the channels that do not have room to scale, but then the channels that do have room to scale, I would put maybe 10% of my leftover budget on each of those.
Okay.
And then see, where am I seeing early signs of success? And wherever I see early signs of success, I would start allocating it more money.
Okay.
And I would allocate it more money till the time the best performer starts performing at the level of the second best performer. When that happens, then you need to really question yourself, is there more incentive to put more money in?
Okay.
Onto the first channel, because the first channel is now performing as worse as the second channel. So then what you need to do is start putting in money in both of those channels.
Okay.
But that's how your algorithm should work, where what you should do is spend a small amount of test budget in all of the channels that you have in your portfolio right now.
Yeah, for optimization also, right?
Yeah, and in which one of these channels are working. And whichever channel starts working, you start giving it more budget. This is working with the current channels. But what you also need to now ensure is, while some part of your experimental budget that you are giving, you should also use it to go towards other channels that you may not have experimented before. And I would generally suggest you choose two types of other channels.
Okay.
One is extremely high risk and extremely high reward.
Right.
For example, if TechCrunch, so what I mean by extremely high risk is, you don't really know if it will succeed or not. For example, let's pursue a PR strategy and hopefully TechCrunch will write an article about us. If that was to happen, you will meet your sales goals or
Right.
you'll meet your lead goal, but you also know it's highly unlikely. So as you must take a channel like that, because what you want to do is in your portfolio, you always want to have a moonshot channel that can potentially beat all the goals and get to the higher level. What you also should do on the side, the second channel that I suggest you choose is something that's more predictable.
Okay.
So you choose one moonshot channel and then you choose other channel that does not have as high of a variability. For example, can I partner with two other companies in B2B SaaS companies and can we do a content piece together where all of us will send traffic and then each of us will benefit from each other's leads. Now the return on that is much more predictable, but it's also not a moonshot channel. You may meet the goal of 500, but you would not get to 5,000 customers.
Right. Yeah. So I also liked your Google sheet that's been floating around that you've perfected kind of, right? So it's like a list of channels, then effort needed, potential success. That would be the average case scenario, the best case scenario, and the worst case scenario. I'll link that into the show notes. So would you suggest like in this sheet, quantifying the number, like effort needed, so as to like have a like more numeric way of assessing these channels?
So the sheet is very qualitative the way it is.
Okay.
That's one of the you don't use the sheet as a scoring sheet. You know what I'm saying? Like the numbers that you get in the sheet is not going to be accurate anyway.
Right.
But the sheet does an extremely good job of telling you a trend.
Okay.
Or helping you make a decision when you really need some qualitative decision making done.
Okay.
So that's how I would look at it. So even if I was to quantify effort needed, I might just assign 3 scores based on low, high, medium.
Okay.
And we can totally use something like fuzzy logic to convert these qualitative numbers into quantitative numbers. But even then, the sheet should be used more as a framework to understand how to proceed. Not necessarily, it won't give you like an accurate number and then this is what you will find.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Also, so how would you advise like founders on getting these 3 primary numbers that you have mentioned, like these average case? So for if you have that historical data, you can obviously find out the average one, right? And
Yes.
best case, worst case also you can kind of find, but still like how do you make a model around this, a mental model kind of that, okay, this would be my worst case, best case, average I can understand, like average each would have an average value. And for channels that we are going to try next, how we don't have any numbers for nor the average one, nor the best, nor the worst. How do we think and put number there?
That's a measure of your own hustle. So for example, if you talk to your peers, you can research online. You'll get some level of what I call that is you'll be able to build your instinct by just reading about it online. You'll understand how this thing works and you'll be able to internalize the process. But the way in which I approach really any of this thing is before we embark on any channel, we do 2 things really well.
Okay.
We talk to vendors. This is what we do at Molekule. We talk, so suppose we want to try radio ads.
Right.
We're talking to maybe 3 to 4 vendors.
Right.
And with each of those vendors, we ask them that, hey, project, what are the different scenarios that you see for us? Okay. Now, 3 or 4 vendors have given you different projections. None of them are perhaps 100% accurate, but that's not the purpose of the sheet anyway. You are using this to understand, are we talking about 100 units sold per month or are we talking about 10,000 units sold per month?
Okay. So
that's the level of balancing that you need to do.
Okay.
So vendors are a really good way, number one. And second, another thing that we have at Molekule is if before we embark on any channel, we talk to at least 3 companies.
Okay.
That on that channel, and that 3 companies can be because of it can be companies that you already know that are doing it, or they can also be. I'm a big fan of just cold emailing on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I help my team do that. So we all do that from time to time,
right,
just to connect with our peers across different companies and then get an idea from that where that channel sits.
Okay, interesting. So based on these, we can find out the risk for each channel. And you mentioned also hedging and upside. Could you explain more on that?
That's what I was telling you. So when in the example that we looked at 500, where we had to go up to 500 leads, and I said that first find growth with what your channels, what are the channels you already have.
Right.
You can say that is your hedge strategy number one.
Okay.
Second, we discussed, by the way, hedging means you need to ensure that there's a certain outcome that you are covered in your worst case scenario.
Oh,
Think of
okay.
think of hedge as a safety net.
Right. So like for the 350 number that we want to hit, for sure. And
To hit, you are
exactly.
already first using a safety net of using the current channels that
Okay.
can scale. Number
Right.
second, when we look at channels outside of your portfolio, you are having a moonshot channel. Let's say that is PR.
Right.
That moonshot channel is your upside.
Okay.
So the risk is very high, and you don't know if that's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's a moonshot channel, because if it works, your outcome can be really, really interesting. If it does not work, then you're dead. So you can't rely upon a moonshot channel to deliver all your growth. So your moonshot channel is an anti-hedge channel or your upside channel.
Okay.
But for you to counter that, we discussed like a hedge strategy for you could be, let's partner with 3 other non-competing B2B SaaS companies,
right,
and see what we do with them. So that's your hedge strategy, because worst case, you know that strategy is going to deliver you 100 leads.
Right.
So then between 350 plus 100, you are already at 450. There's a good chance you can find the extra 50 in your current portfolio that can scale. So there's a high reason of chance. There's a high reason to believe that you will hit your 500 goal.
Okay.
The only thing now that you have is an upside or a moonshot channel. If that works, you have a chance to hit 2000 leads.
Okay. Makes sense. So about let's say we have 10 channels that we know the trend for, let's say 3-4 quarters. How does growth levers work in this whole strategy? I mean, like for channels, either we could optimize each channel for better conversion. For example, obviously Facebook adds more copies, more variations, A/B testing, right? Or we could just like pour more money onto top of the funnel also for any paid channel. So and even for organic channels also, we could definitely optimize for better conversions, right? For different type of organic channels. So how do we factor in these things while making the strategy?
So you'll have to factor that in when you talk about like a best estimate on where can you, because the thing is, as you scale, right? As you scale, you will see that your performance declines.
Right.
That's just the truth of the matter.
Right. Channel saturation also happens.
Exactly. And
Exactly.
beyond a certain level, you may not be able to push too much.
Okay.
So as you scale there, the performance will decline. But that's where you need to constantly optimize the conversion rate as well for each of these channels to balance or to counter that.
Okay. So
and it's not going to be a one thing where the efficiency lost because of scaling can be balanced because of conversion rate optimization. But you need to try to keep both hand in hand. You don't want to scale and the other thing about scaling is you need to scale it to a place where you don't end up oversaturating and the performance doesn't become worse on that channel as compared to other channels.
Okay, makes sense. Awesome. Also, so we've been talking all about this, which is kind of very, if it's a SaaS product, it's mostly post product market fit, right? So how would this approach get affected, let's say if the startup is in like very early customer development stage, or they're just trying to achieve product market fit? So you once mentioned very good example of like a highlight startup where they were making the MVP, keeping in mind just one channel, acquisition channel, and taking feedback from just one channel. Could you like share your thought in that?
There's a very interesting book by Geoffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm.
Okay.
And generally, there's nothing wrong in just using one channel for getting product market fit.
Okay.
But then you need to be then you need to know that is that product market fit going to replicate when you go to other channels.
Okay. So that one out of your 4 points that you mentioned, that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. A lot of startups fail because they can't cross the chasm.
Okay.
What I mean by that is they can't cross this is what Geoffrey Moore champions in his book. But the thing early on when you're launching, you're talking to a very early adopter market.
I'll give an example. So let's say someone launched on Product Hunt, right? So Product Hunt has a very, you could say very niche kind of, because there are all early startup founders or people working in startups in the VC industry, startup ecosystem. So if you're doing entire customer development and taking feedback on your MVP, would that harm your because you're taking just Product Hunt as your channel? Would that how do you think about that? Would that be harmful or not?
I mean, it's still, any feedback is good feedback, right?
Right.
So any feedback that you get is going to help you, but it can harm you because there are maybe a few million people at max at Product Hunt.
Right.
So if Molecule is designed only for them, then we miss the mass market opportunity,
Right.
which is what exactly crossing the chasm is. As you go from investors to early adopters to late majority to laggards, you need to ensure that you are changing your product and your branding and messaging to talk to the next slab that's out there. And the place where a lot of companies fail in the growth stage, I'm not talking about the product market fit stage, but in the growth stage, is crossing the chasm when they have to start talking to an audience that's not the early majority. So when they that's not the early adopter, sorry. So when they have to cross the chasm and move away from talking to just the early adopter, they fail. Because the product has been designed in a way where Product Hunt people would respond to it.
Right.
But the majority of people who are not on Product Hunt would not respond to it.
Awesome. So you mentioned one resource. What other content resource would you suggest like people to consume in terms of, let's say, books, courses, blogs, newsletter?
Follow Andrew Shen if you do not.
Yeah, Andrew Shen. Yes, of course.
Andrew Shen is the person, and then Brian Balfour. Andrew Shen and Brian both produce very good quality content on growth. So that will be extremely effective for anyone in this field who's trying to learn more. Follow Steve Blank. Actually, one person that's not as celebrated as should, or maybe he is, but he is actually the father of all of the lean startup and customer development stuff. So Steve Blank is the other guy.
Awesome. Anyways, awesome, Gaurav. Anything else you would like to plug in? Your Twitter or like any blog?
Not active, but LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, more than happy to connect with them there. And then, happy to help in any way I can.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Gaurav. It was pleasure talking to you, and you had some really great funda around growth. So thanks a lot.
Sounds great, Arun. Thank you, and then all the best with the good work you're doing.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes would be available in the link below, or you can just go to insightsalley.com/notes. Please rate, review, subscribe in whichever app you are listening to this episode. And most importantly, give feedback in comments, reviews, or you can just email me at arun@insightsalley.com. You can also follow and connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, etc. My handle everywhere is ARUN11192. And remember, always be learning. Bye.